The biblical account of Jesus' conception, as detailed in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, presents a scenario where a divine entity, God, impregnates a young Jewish woman named Mary without her prior physical involvement or explicit sexual consent in the conventional sense. Estimated to be between 12 and 16 years old at the time, Mary was below the modern age of consent in most jurisdictions, rendering this act analogous to statutory rape under contemporary U.S. laws. This interpretation frames God as committing a serious criminal offense by causing pregnancy in a minor, regardless of the miraculous non-physical method described. Such an analysis, while anachronistic, highlights how ancient religious narratives can be scrutinized through modern legal lenses to reveal ethical dissonances, supporting the notion that divine actions in this story equate to exploitative crimes against a vulnerable teenager. Statutory rape is defined as non-forcible sexual activity with an individual below the age of consent, which varies across U.S. states but generally ranges from 16 to 18 years old. In the narrative, Mary's youth places her firmly under this threshold, and the impregnation, though portrayed as spiritual, results in her bearing a child, mirroring outcomes of unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor. Certain state laws explicitly criminalize impregnating a child under 16, classifying it as a felony regardless of consent claims, further bolstering the argument that God's role constitutes a direct violation. This divine intervention overrides Mary's bodily autonomy, aligning with definitions of sexual exploitation where a power imbalance precludes true consent. Beyond statutory rape, the story implicates God in consent-related crimes, as the Annunciation via an angel could be seen as coercive pressure on a minor incapable of fully informed decision-making due to her age and societal position. Modern interpretations emphasize that minors cannot legally consent to acts leading to pregnancy, viewing such scenarios as forms of child sexual exploitation. The narrative's emphasis on Mary's eventual acceptance does not negate the initial imposition, supporting claims of forced pregnancy, a recognized violation in international human rights contexts, though not always codified domestically as a standalone crime. Crimes attributed to God in modern legal terms. Statutory rape forms the core offense, as the impregnation of a minor below the age of consent inherently violates laws designed to protect adolescents from exploitation. In states like California, unlawful sexual intercourse with anyone under 18 is punishable as a misdemeanor or felony, depending on age differences and circumstances. Applying this to the divine act, the absence of physical force does not absolve the outcome, as statutory laws assume incapacity for consent in minors. This supports viewing God as perpetrating a crime that disregards modern protections against teen pregnancy induced by adults or authoritative figures. Consent crimes extend to sexual assault by coercion, where the angelic visitation and divine command create an environment of undue influence on a young girl. In legal terms, this parallels offenses like sexual abuse in the third degree, where power dynamics invalidate apparent agreement. Forced pregnancy, while more prominent in international law as a war crime or human rights violation, aligns domestically with reproductive coercion statutes in some states, criminalizing actions that compel childbirth without full volition. The story's miraculous element does not mitigate the ethical breach, as the result, imposed motherhood on a minor, mirrors prohibited reproductive harms. Additional possible crimes include child endangerment, as inducing pregnancy in a 12 to 16-year-old exposes her to heightened health risks associated with adolescent childbirth, such as complications historically linked to early marriages. Contributing to the delinquency of a minor could apply if the divine plan disrupts her normal development or education in a modern context. Gender-based violence, encompassing forced marriage-like scenarios, further implicates God in violations akin to those addressed in human rights frameworks, where child impregnation is deemed exploitative. Crimes by Joseph and other adults in the narrative. Joseph, estimated at 18 to 25 years old, engages in a betrothal and subsequent marriage to a minor, which under modern U.S. laws could constitute contributing to child marriage, a practice linked to human rights violations like denial of education and increased violence risks. In historical context, this was normative, but anachronistically, it supports charges of unlawful sex with a minor if consummation occurred post-birth, as some traditions imply. His role in accepting the pregnancy without questioning the minor's consent further aligns with accessory to exploitation. Other adults, such as community elders or religious authorities implied in the era, contributed to systemic crimes by enforcing early betrothal customs that facilitated teen pregnancies. This includes aiding and abetting child marriage, a form of trafficking in girls under international views, where arranged unions violate autonomy. In modern terms, they could face conspiracy charges for perpetuating gender-based violence through cultural norms that exposed minors to reproductive harms. Possible crimes for these figures encompass failure to report child exploitation, as overlooking a minor's impregnation without intervention mirrors mandatory reporting violations today. In historical settings, their complicity in child brides' vulnerabilities supports broader indictments of societal structures enabling such acts. Comprehensive list of crimes and possible offenses. The following enumerates the crimes supported by this critique. Crimes by God. Statutory rape, non-forcible sexual activity with a minor below consent age. Sexual assault by coercion, using divine authority to induce pregnancy. Forced pregnancy, imposing reproduction without valid consent. Child endangerment, exposing a minor to pregnancy risks. Reproductive coercion, compelling childbirth on an adolescent. Gender-based violence, exploiting patriarchal dynamics. Crimes by Joseph. Unlawful sex with a minor, if post-birth relations occurred. Contributing to the delinquency of a minor, accepting and facilitating the situation. Aiding child marriage, betrothal to an underage girl. Accessory to exploitation, not challenging the divine imposition. Crimes by other adults and era figures. Aiding and abetting child marriage, enforcing early betrothals. Conspiracy to commit gender-based violence, cultural complicity in minor exploitation. Failure to protect minors, overlooking vulnerabilities in teen pregnancies. Human trafficking elements, arranged unions as exploitation. This framework underscores how the narrative, when viewed legally, portrays multiple transgressions, urging re-evaluation of sacred stories through ethical modernity. Conclusion: Omniscience and Moral Foresight, Reflections on Divine Choice in Sacred Narrative. In conclusion, the virgin birth narrative, when subjected to an anachronistic yet illuminating critique through the prism of modern legal and ethical standards, reveals profound tensions between ancient cultural norms and contemporary understandings of consent, autonomy, and child protection. The divine act of impregnating Mary, a young Jewish teenager estimated at 12 to 16 years old, equates, in outcome if not method, to statutory rape and related offenses, as it imposes pregnancy upon a minor deemed incapable of valid consent under laws ranging from 16 to 18 across jurisdictions. This imposition, facilitated by overwhelming divine authority conveyed through an angelic messenger, undermines claims of free acceptance, positioning the event as coercive reproductive exploitation that disregards bodily sovereignty and exposes a vulnerable adolescent to the physical and social burdens of motherhood. Joseph's role in betrothing and marrying a minor, alongside the broader complicity of first-century societal structures in normalizing early adolescent marriage and childbearing, further compounds these transgressions when viewed retrospectively. Such practices, normative in an era of limited life expectancy and economic imperatives, facilitated systemic vulnerabilities that modern frameworks classify as child endangerment, contributing to delinquency, and elements of gender-based violence. The narrative's limited attestation, confined to Matthew and Luke amid discrepancies and absent from earlier Christian writings, combined with its reinterpretation of Isaiah's prophecy and parallels to ancient divine birth motifs, underscores its theological rather than historical character, amplifying ethical concerns when divine prerogative overrides human vulnerability. Ultimately, the omniscience attributed to God introduces an inescapable introspective paradox: an all-knowing deity, cognizant of societal norms, moral evolutions, and legal frameworks across all eternity, would foresee the raising of consent ages, the prioritization of adolescent maturity, and the global condemnation of child impregnation as exploitative. Choosing to align the incarnation with ancient customs, selecting a young teenager rather than an adult woman above future consent thresholds, suggests either indifference to foreseeable ethical judgments or a deliberate prioritization of cultural conformity over anticipatory moral foresight. This divine foreknowledge renders the act not merely contextual but eternally accountable, challenging traditional defenses of transcendence and inviting profound reflection on whether sacred narratives can withstand scrutiny against evolving standards of justice, consent, and human dignity that an omniscient creator would inherently comprehend and, perhaps, be expected to uphold across time.